this. All right, I mean a pretty straightforward Seam component. This is just so I know something is happening, right? So I can see in the console. And this is the name of the component, right? So let's see how we would do it. So this is my button right here. Now, so I don't need to type code, and you guys not just sitting and watching me type. I'm going to use the snippets here on the side. So I prepared everything. I'm just going to insert it, and then I'll explain what I did. So let me comment this out, because we're not going to be using this anymore. All right, so there are a couple of things. First is the URL. Okay, notice I'm using the service factory. That's the client component, just enables me to call any Seam component. Okay, so first I'm setting the URL. Obviously, you don't have to set the URL in every function. Okay, you can set it once somewhere, but I'm just showing you what goes into making a call. All right. So what I do next is I create kind of a local reference or proxy, you want to call it, to the Seam component. Now, application service factory, I mean, what is this? Well, it looks like this. All right. So service factory, that's the actual JavaFX component. And this is right here is the Seam component name. All right? The only other thing is that obviously I need to know which methods are available. So the way it's done here is that this is an interface, which looks, all right? That's all you have to do. So you call that service factory, give it a component name, and you have an interface. So now you can call any methods, right? So going back to the script, okay. So this line right here, I'm getting a reference to that Seam component, and say hello, right, is the method that's available, right? It's defined in the interface, but that's also the method in the Seam component, and then I pass it right here is the JavaFX input field value. Okay, so let's run this now. All right, and right here, if you guys can see that this is the log statement from the component. All right, so I mean it's really pretty straightforward. I mean you don't have to worry about the low-level stuff that's happening, right? I mean you do have to obviously write a few lines of code, but I mean you have to do something, okay? But the key is that you're still working on a component level. Right? You're really not dropping any lower. So right here, you only need to know the component name to make this work. All right. So a little bit more interesting. I mean, still not super enterprise level. So what I can do, enter a name here, right, and I get a list of users. Now this is also happening on the client only, at least the adding the user. But this John, Charlie, and Sergey, they're coming from the server, all right? And how do I get these users? Well, I'm using this idea of a binding, okay? And looking on the server, okay, this is the user manager. So notice right here, right? So this is also a Seam component because I am outjecting it. Okay, so make a call, basically this user list component must be available in a Seam context. Okay, because that's how the binding works. It has to find the component in the context. And I'm getting it back, basically getting the users on the client. Right? So it's different than calling a method. I'm basically binding to a component. All right? So let's see now. Now, of course, we want to be able to add users. Okay? The number of ways of doing it, the simplest way is right here is the user manager. So that's the JavaFX reference to the user manager component. And so let's see, there are a number of ways to add the user. We can do, okay, so this is what's available. So there are three methods, different methods for adding the user, just as an example. I mean, I don't know which one is the best. It would be up to you to decide. And then I also have one to remove a user. All right? So coming back here, All right. So person is the entry in the input field. All right. So looks the same, but on the server, you guys can see now I have, this is the list of all the users. Right. So I actually went all the way to the server, obviously added the user, and I get, it's also the client. Well, the addition is happening on the client, right? I'm doing really two things here. First, adding the user on the client, and then sending it to basically synchronize in a way with the server. Another way of doing it, and again, this is just the same thing, but same result, but just a way of doing it, is right here. So now instead of sending just a string, I'm actually able to send a whole user. So I'm creating a user object on the client and sending it back to the server. So that's just another way of doing it, right? I'm not going to run it, but the result will be the same. But finally, what we can do is we can use binding. So I said binding gets the user from the context. We can also commit the user back to the context. Okay? So this is right here, because the user is also a stream component. So first I'm getting the user. I need to make a change to the user. So in this case, I'm just setting the name, and back I'm committing the user. Now this right here is the component name. All right? So running it, okay, same thing. Now, as for looking at the user one, so this is the component name. All right? So again, two ways. I mean, again, just call methods where you can also use this idea of a binding commit, right? Another thing is, if you remember, there was a validation component, right? So notice right here, I have a validation on my entity. So how would we do that? Going back to, okay, so there is a kind of a built-in entity validator component. And this is right here. User is the component name, and the name is the field name. All right? And the person is the value from the JavaFX client. All right? And when I do that, so if I don't enter anything,